former spy boss Arthur Fraser has a new job, but not everyone is pleased. Fraser has been transferred from the State Security Agency to the Correctional Services Department. However, he's still embroiled in a legal row with the Intelligence Services Oversight Head, Setlhomamaru Dintwe. Fraser is accused of interfering with an investigation into his own conduct. In Jacques Pauw's book, The President's Keepers, it's alleged Fraser forged former Intelligence Minister Ronnie Kasrils' signature to establish an illegal intelligence program. The former minister joins us now. Mr. Kasrils, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Well, perhaps we can go back to that very point that, you know, once upon a time, he forged your signature.
Well, of course, that's legally, we have to say, allegation. I'm very interested to know and understand of what went on in terms of the use or abuse of my signature after I left intelligence and government at the same time as former President Mbeki was recalled, so that's September 2008. And I actually have my attorneys on the job in this respect. There have been an exchange of letters with Arthur Fraser some months back, and he had sent me a rather threatening letter at the time of Jacques Pauw's book and the information allegations that were released then. But I had already had insight into that because the investigative team in 2010 from the intelligence institution had come to see me to show me a document with my signature on. It was a regular document. I was able to ascertain it was a signature of a document I had signed. But there's a lot of finuckery apparently around that. Whether what Jacques Pauw is alleging is in fact the case that there was forgery or copying of that signature, whether it was used in a particular way. That was the subject partly of the investigation then underway. It disappeared, that investigation, and some years later, as we know, a couple of years ago, former President Zuma appointed this man to this very important position, the Director General of State Security. I was shocked, given what had actually occurred and had never been explained. And therefore, with the Jacques Pauw allegation and then this issue now with the intelligence oversight man, I've become very interested, and my attorneys are now, I'll be having a meeting with them on Friday, are now talking about approaching the intelligence man and seeing whether we can put our two issues together, because I'm asking the Inspector General to provide me with all that documentation, and I'm very keen that his inquiry goes the full way. It's in keeping not just with myself personally, but in terms of our whole security issue. We must have a security and intelligence establishment that really abides by the rules, the vast responsibility in their hands, and service to the Constitution, to our Parliament and government, and of course to the people of South Africa.
From what you know, who is Arthur Fraser, that which presumably is or made you or got you to be worried or concerned when he was appointed?
Well, in fact, I know Arthur Fraser from way back. He was working for the ANC underground inside the country, connected with eNCA, Operation Vula. So, young man then, no longer a young man, but middle-aged, a little bit older maybe than yourself or thereabouts. And he seemed a bright, intelligent person from a very good family. He worked for me when I was intelligence minister, and there was certain promotion that occurred then. I must say I had a belief in him and high hopes. but it was by the time I was leaving, and then the scandal that erupted that made me very concerned. It also linked to the spy tapes story, which had been delivered, as we know, to the attorneys of Jacob Zuma, and which helped to topple former President Mbeki. And it's then that I became very dubious, because you see the interception of those government telephone calls had to have come from my previous agency, and at a time when I was indeed a sitting minister and knew nothing about it. So there's an aspect there. I can't say it was Arthur Fraser. The media have speculated and cast doubts about him in that respect. But this latest scandal really raises very great concerns. And I've recently been on radio and interviews and raising the same concerns we're looking in here. And I must say right out that I'm very relieved that the President with the new Minister of State Security have acted in removing him from this very key position. This undermines any attempts that if he has underway against the Inspector General and the revoking of a clearance of security which had been given to the Inspector General.
But if he's not good for intelligence services, why should he be good for correctional services?
Precisely, and I was coming to that point. We've seen already from the opposition side, and no doubt it'll be from the Communist Party, who has come out very strongly on issues of security and indeed of Arthur Fraser, that we have a right to ask at the presidential level. There's such a cloud over this man. Surely he should have been suspended pending investigation. But when we see a move, it's a demotion for sure, and a much lesser ministry, but as you're expressing yourself, great concern. How can this man remain in a position with this kind of cloud hanging over him?
But this has been the story of heads of intelligence. It didn't start with this administration, the previous, the Zuma administration, but even the Thabo Mbeki administration. For some reason, you always have intelligence chiefs either embroiled in controversy or not getting along either with the
To the credit of former President Mbeki, by the way, the first scandal occurred when I was minister back in 2005, and we had great concerns about the abuse of power and resources by the DG at that time, tried and trusted 1976 generation ANC MK, knew Billy Masetla well from exile. He had a brilliant career. I found him, was working with me as my DG, and things came off the rails. Now, Mbeki moved against him, and he was first suspended and then dismissed. In relation to what happened there, that starts this real sinister process, because up to that time, under previous Minister Joan Klantla, and then for a time Lindiwe Sisulu, the agency, it might not have been perfect, there had been certain problems, but at least there was nothing of this nature. And the question then, I would say, was greatly sullied by a former security intelligence chief of the ANC. I was MK chief of intelligence, by the way, but Jacob Zuma, as we know, had been been very key to counterintelligence and security for the ANC. He comes in to power post-Polokwane, and we've then seen things really go downhill. I'm not placing everything on his head, but certainly that has to be clearly understood and analysed, and I think the country has come to see the foibles, the abuses of Jacob Zuma in many respects, including placing lackeys of his, people just simply loyal to him, doing his bidding in various positions, but certainly in intelligence from that particular time, post-Mbeki. But I think your question does go deeper. It goes deeper into our history of struggle, the apartheid era, and the kind of scandals that we had there in the police and the corruption generally, and of course in security and intelligence. We have failed so far. We've tried from the time of Nelson Mandela post-1994, and with Parliament and the writing of the Constitution, and with it regulations and white papers for the intelligence community. But there was something at the center that was really wrong. Now, I'll say to you what I believe it is. The politicization of the services. We managed to avoid that in the Defence Force. In the intelligence services, there was a rot, I would say, perhaps not quite a rot, but things were going awry. I was greatly concerned when I found the level of politicization, which basically then meant non-professionalism, not having their eye on the real job and the tasks for intelligence, but it was so focused on political struggles, the succession of leadership of the ANC.
But that's what I was going to ask. What's particularly interesting about what has happened over the years is that this, your intelligence services don't direct their energies and resources and everything at looking at issues like, for example, the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which we are now reaping rewards of in many ways. But rather, their efforts are directed at destroying one another and being used in these battles,
yes.
Power battles.
Well, of course, there we must put the blame and the responsibility on the ruling party, the ANC, because what's reflected there and in other levels of the government and the state, as we well know, has been the factionalism and infighting within the ANC. We hope that the ANC is going to recover and is managing to adjust away from that. But it's that factionalism which became so rife within government and state, and clearly I saw it to my cost, which is why in the end I became persona non grata with something I really wanted to serve, that ANC and the intelligence security community, because of that factionalism. And when you say how they've lost focus, what I did post the Billy Masetla saga was I got former Deputy Minister Joe Matthews, a very erudite man, together with Frene Ginwala and Laurie Nathan, was the Matthew Commission, which from 2007 to about the time I was leaving, late 2008, to study, analyze and come up with recommendations for the reform of the intelligence services. They produced a wonderful report. The moment Jacob Zuma came into power, that report was pushed aside.
But I mean, that said, Mr. Kasrils, none of you can really wash your hands off this, like the Pontius Pilate of the Bible. Sorry to quote that.
No,
to a communist.
It's relevant. I follow religious culture very much.
Yeah, but that said, I mean, you ought to, even though you are no longer a Minister of Intelligence, given the gravity and the seriousness with which that report and all the knowledge you had to be treated, you ought to have gone to the trenches, because you know very little happens if it is not brought about or is not given attention by the ANC.
Sure.
What then did many of you who are operating in that space do to make sure that that report you're talking about, that Edward Nathan and company had put together, is actually followed through?
Okay, now I'm not here washing hands saying I did everything perfectly, but at least I can say very honestly that from that time I used my voice, I spoke out publicly against what was taking place within the intelligence services, those appointments of Jacob Zuma's, of non-entities, and I raised it with the ANC and the Communist Party. I'm on record. I've produced a book which actually deals with all that at the same time as Jacques Pauw's book had came out. And on the Matthews Commission, I never stopped raising the issue. Over and over, in the media, on platforms with the NGOs, civil society, and to people in government. Read this report if you want to know what is wrong with the service and how to put it right. It doesn't put me up there with the angels, but I'm answering your question for myself firstly. As for the rest of my comrades, as we say, I think they were absolutely pathetic, from the Communist Party as well, and people within the ANC who hadn't really liked Zuma. Nobody did anything about this. They went along, especially the cronies of Zuma, the opportunists who had served in Beki, who went in their droves behind Jacob Zuma for those 8 years that have ruined the country, and they did nothing. They weren't concerned until he lost position. Now they've all run over to Cyril Ramaphosa. We're hoping, I'm hoping, and I've raised this through various channels with the President, messages and so on, including a copy of the Matthews report. Please read this, Comrade President. So we see this move. I applaud what the President's done. Half-heartedly, because as we discussed, I don't see why Arthur Fraser wasn't suspended. But at least it's a bold move. And I'm calling through you and the questions to the nation, to the President. Dust off the Matthews report. It's a bit outdated. It's can't be the only answer. We've got to have a huge debate. We've got to bring in civil society. I believe we've got to go back to the drawing board, to the first basics about intelligence and security. There's many things that we as the ANC put in there in terms of their mandate, such as a political mandate, which is very broad. That enabled the intelligence service to believe they could look into Kathy's political life, yours, Frini Jinwala's, Laurie Nathan's, Ronnie Kasrils, Lakota, everybody out there, in terms of, are these people getting involved in politics that we don't like? And we will say, as Fraser has said about the Inspector General, this is a threat to our people and national security, using that kind of approach. So we've got to deal with this, root it out once and for all.
Mr. Kasrils, that's where we're going to leave it for this evening. Thank you very much for coming.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Minister of Intelligence, Ronnie Kasrils.